The clouds hung low over the city, thick and grey like wool blankets pulled across the sky. In the heart of the square, thousands had gathered shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the barricades, waiting. The rumors had spread for days. Pope Leo XIV was coming, not just to speak, not just to wave from a distant balcony, but to do something no one quite dared to name. Security lined the perimeter. Flags fluttered. Some held children on their shoulders, others gripped rosaries, whispering prayers. Journalists adjusted their microphones. Vendors fell quiet. Even the birds seemed to know something unusual was about to happen. Then, the motorcade appeared. A slow roll of black vehicles moved into view, flanked by guards. The crowd surged forward slightly, breath catching in unison. But it wasn't the grand car that drew the most attention. It was the simple white van behind it, from which stepped a slender figure in sandals and linen robes. He did not wear the ornate vestments. No gold, no velvet, just plain white cloth and a wooden staff in hand. His white hair moved gently in the wind, and his eyes, clear and deep as river water, scanned the crowd not like a monarch but like a shepherd. Pope Leo XIV, born Francesco di Luca in the forgotten alleys of Naples, had never forgotten what it felt like to be hungry, to sleep beside a leaking roof, to watch his mother pray for miracles that never came. He had once been a boy whose feet were washed by a kind old priest when the world offered him nothing else. That memory had never left him. He stepped into the square alone. The silence was louder than a sermon. He did not speak. Instead, he turned toward a group of aides and motioned for something. Moments later, a simple wooden basin and a pitcher of water were brought forward. A clean cloth folded beside them. He placed them at the very center of the plaza, where marble lines formed a sunburst pattern on the ground. The people murmured. "He's not going to do it, is he?" someone whispered. A teenager pulled at her mother's sleeve. "Why is he kneeling?" Pope Leo lowered himself slowly to his knees. The staff rested beside him. The basin gleamed faintly in the filtered light. Every motion was deliberate, unhurried. He poured the water into the bowl with both hands. The splash echoed faintly. Not a sound stirred the crowd. He looked up briefly, scanning the people gathered. His eyes searched not for cameras, not for applause, but for a face. A single face. Someone whose soul would speak to his. Then he waited. Minutes passed. The tension was thick but gentle. The square had become sacred ground, and though no one knew what would happen next, everyone felt something awakening within them. An old ache for grace, for humility, for something real. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. These powerful moments deserve to be remembered together. And still, the Pope knelt in silence. From the edge of the plaza, Sister Catherine Brooks walked slowly, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a young man beside her. His name was Samir al-Masri. His eyes were downcast, his steps hesitant. Though dressed plainly, he carried the weight of a journey far longer than his 29 years could explain. They had arrived quietly, without announcement. A small delegation from a refugee shelter nearby had been invited, but Samir hadn't expected to be chosen for anything, least of all for this. The sound of the water being poured reached him. He looked up. There he was, Pope Leo XIV, kneeling before a wooden basin, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze sweeping the crowd. Then their eyes met. Samir froze. His first instinct was to look away. He wasn't worthy, not here, not now, but something in the Pope's expression, something impossibly tender, held him still. Sister Catherine leaned in. "He's asking for you." Samir's lips parted, but no words came. He took one shaky step forward, then another. The crowd parted slowly as he walked, silence following in his wake. Every movement felt exposed, as if each footstep carried the burden of stories no one knew, wounds no one could see. When he reached the center, he stopped. The Pope looked up at him, nodded once, and without a word, gently guided him to sit. Samir sat, and the Pope began. He lifted Samir's foot with great care, as if it were holy. The water was cool, cleansing. The cloth passed gently over his skin, washing away not just the dust of the street, but the unseen remnants of desert trails, prison camps, endless waiting. Samir's chest tightened, his fingers clenched around his knees. Then, without warning, the tears came. At first they were quiet, just wet trails down his cheeks, but they deepened quickly into soft sobs, then full weeping. He did not hide them. He couldn't. There was too much grief behind them, too much memory. No one moved. The crowd, uncertain at first, felt the moment deepen like a slow tide rising. Phones lowered, arms dropped. Someone placed a hand over their heart. Another pulled off their hat. You could hear breathing, trembling. A child whispered to her father, "Is he okay?" The man wiped his eye. "He will be now." The Pope never spoke. He just kept washing. The basin filled with water and salt from tears. The cloth remained clean, the gesture sacred. When he finished, he dried Samir's feet gently, his hands weathered, reverent. He kissed the top of each foot, then placed them carefully back on the ground. Samir looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a global figure, not a religious leader, but a man who had chosen him, a man who had said, without words, "You are seen. You matter." And in that look, a new kind of silence fell, one not of awe or curiosity, but of shared recognition. Something ancient and human had been touched. People did not cheer. They could not. Their hearts were too full, their throats too tight. Instead, they wept quietly together. Strangers stood closer. A woman reached for the hand of a man beside her. A prayer escaped the lips of someone who hadn't prayed in years. No one could have explained what was happening, but no one would ever forget it. As Samir's tears fell, the crowd began to shift. First, a woman near the front knelt slowly, as if compelled by something larger than herself. Then a man in a business suit followed, pressing one knee into the stone, his hand trembling on the ground. Soon, others joined, young and old, rich and poor, black and white, Muslim and Christian. One by one they knelt. It wasn't reverence for a man, it was reverence for the moment. A veteran, medals pinned to his coat, looked across at a Muslim woman in a blue hijab. Their eyes met. Without hesitation, he moved to her and gently took her hand. She squeezed it. He bowed his head. Her lips trembled. A paramedic dropped her phone and closed her eyes. A teenager wiped his face with his sleeve. A group of tourists from Brazil began to hum a hymn softly, unsure of the words but sure of the spirit. No one led them. No one told them to sing. It simply happened. The city square became something else entirely, no longer a place of cement and structure, but a living heart, beating with something deeper than understanding. Then Pope Leo XIV looked into Samir's eyes and spoke. His voice was low, almost inaudible, but Sister Catherine caught the words. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks, and translated. He said, "No one here is more worthy than you." Gasps moved through the crowd, followed by silence. Samir's head dropped. He covered his face with both hands. His shoulders shook. Sister Catherine placed a hand gently on his back, her other hand over her chest. A man whispered to his wife, "Did you hear that?" She nodded. He meant it. From the edge of the square, a news anchor tried to continue his broadcast, but stopped mid-sentence. His voice cracked. He turned to the camera, lowered his microphone, and let the image speak instead. On every screen around the world, the footage played, unfiltered, uncut, raw. A pope kneeling before a refugee, a basin of water between them, the air still, the crowd silent. It reached corners of the globe where politics had failed, where division reigned. But here now there was unity, not enforced, not arranged, just felt. On social media, it spread like wildfire. Hashtags lit up timelines. The foot washing, Pope and refugee, dignity restored. Celebrities paused their feeds. Activists wept openly. Even cynics stopped to ask, what if this could change something? But no post, no comment, no headline captured what it truly was. It wasn't about religion, it wasn't about power, it wasn't even about the Pope, it was about Samir. A man who had no microphone, no audience, no following, just his story, just his humanity. And now the world saw it. Somewhere in the crowd, a pastor wept. A rabbi closed his eyes and whispered scripture. A child clapped, not understanding why, only knowing this was good. The basin sat in the center, still and full. Samir looked up, his face marked with emotion. He met the Pope's gaze again, and this time, something new passed between them, something lighter. Not joy, not yet, but relief, like the moment after a storm, when you realize the sky might clear. People didn't know whether to stay or go. No one wanted to move to break the spell. It was fragile, like glass in the sun, so they stayed and waited. For a moment, Samir forgot where he was. He wasn't in a crowded square anymore. He was back in Aleppo, sitting on the floor of his childhood home, listening to his sister hum as she braided her hair. The smell of cumin and lentils drifted from the kitchen. Laughter echoed faintly from the hallway. Then came the sound that would never leave him, the sharp whistle of air before the explosion. Dust, fire, silence. He had survived. His sister hadn't. The next year blurred, camps, waiting, forms, interviews, an endless carousel of proving his worth to strangers with clipboards. The hardest part wasn't the hunger. It was the invisibility. Every room he entered, he felt erased, until his name was called for asylum, until he arrived in America. He thought he'd start over. He hadn't expected to feel smaller. But today had rewritten something inside him. The Pope stood and extended his hand. Samir took it. The man who had just knelt before him now pulled him gently to his feet. There was no applause, just the soft rustle of bodies rising together. Samir looked around, disoriented, but then his gaze steadied. He saw the people, really saw them, not as a blur, not as a wall of watchers, but as individuals. Their faces reflected back something he had never seen, recognition. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But his eyes said everything. Sister Catherine stepped beside him, placing one hand on his shoulder, the other on the Pope's. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her silence was full of reverence. The Pope's gaze was warm, steady. Samir nodded, not in thanks but in understanding. That was when it happened. Someone clapped, not loud, not raucous. A single clap, then another. Soon hands came together across the plaza, not in celebration, but in rhythm, slow, steady, reverent. The sound echoed upward into the grey sky, like rain returning to heaven. No chants, no shouts. Just applause, not for a pope, not for a miracle, but for a moment of truth. In the crowd, stories began unfolding silently. A man who had once shouted at immigrants from his porch now found himself wiping tears with his sleeve. A mother who had buried her child in a war a continent away reached into her bag and pulled out a candle. She lit it, shielding the flame with her palm. A priest who had questioned his faith for months felt it return, not with fire or visions, but in the quiet dignity of water and cloth. The applause faded. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Samir turned slowly, taking in the square as if seeing it for the first time. The police officer, the child on her father's shoulders, the homeless man at the back with his hands folded in prayer. He wasn't invisible anymore. For the first time since the bombs fell, he felt whole. The Pope reached down and took the empty basin. He held it gently, like an offering. Samir placed his hand on the rim, and together they carried it a few steps to the side. The gesture was simple but profound. The water that had washed pain away now rested calmly, its surface undisturbed. It held stories no one could tell, and truths no words could hold. They stood beside it for a moment longer, the three of them, Pope, refugee, and nun, united not by creed, but by compassion. No one moved. They didn't have to. When the applause faded, Pope Leo Tuftim stepped forward and raised his hand, not high, not commanding, but gently, asking for stillness. The murmurs died away. All eyes returned to him. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "This is not a performance," he said. "This is repentance." A hush fell again. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he continued. "We have built walls around our hearts. We have chosen fear over love, silence over truth, comfort over courage. But today one man reminded us, without speeches, without wealth, without power, that dignity does not come from status. It comes from being human. He turned slightly, glancing towards Samir, then back to the crowd. "If you cannot love the stranger," he said, "you have not loved God." The silence was absolute, and then, like a wave, the emotions swept through the square. Some began to cry openly. Others closed their eyes, their lips moving in prayer. One man crossed himself slowly, his hands trembling. A woman knelt again, this time with her face in her hands, and then thunder. Not from the sky, but from the people. Applause, deep and uncontainable, burst forth. It wasn't the clapping of joy. It was the sound of something breaking loose, something long trapped beneath cynicism and fear. It was release. It was unity. The Pope turned back to Samir. For a moment they simply stood there, the older man and the younger one facing each other. Then Leo XIV opened his arms and Samir stepped into them. The embrace was firm, fatherly, sincere. When they stepped apart, they did not go separate ways. They walked side by side across the square, not toward a throne or a platform, but toward the people. A young girl approached hesitantly, holding a small bundle of wildflowers. Her mother nodded, encouraging her. She walked to the Pope and held them up with both hands. He knelt again, not to command but to receive. He took the flowers, smiled and held them to his chest. Then he turned and offered them to Samir. The young man accepted them, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Thank you," he whispered in English. The words were small, but in that moment they felt like thunder too. The Pope rested a hand on his shoulder. Samir nodded. The square no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a gathering of souls. Differences of language, faith, skin and nation blurred into something deeper, shared humanity. No one called it a miracle, but no one denied that something miraculous had taken place. As the Pope and Samir continued walking, people began stepping forward, not toward them, but toward each other. Strangers embraced, enemies forgave, children laughed. Somewhere a guitar began to play. A priest and an imam stood side by side in silence, eyes glistening. It was not the end of war or poverty, but it was a beginning. And sometimes that's enough. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe in stories that can heal the world, and click the video on your screen to witness another moment of hope you won't forget.